After the second failed assassination attempt on his father's life, Donald Trump Jr., aka Don Jr., took to social media to relentlessly berate those whom he believed were insufficiently empathetic towards his father's situation, only to be hit with insta karma as his own lack of empathy and his own past came back to bite him. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends. Got a couple of things to look at in this video. Don Jr., profoundly unprincipled hypocrite and deranged son of the former president, took to social media to rant at people whom he believed were insufficiently empathetic about the second failed assassination attempt against his father. So in response to Rachel Vindman, who is the wife of Alexander Vindman, a former Trump administration official who served his country, his nation faithfully, and unfortunately was thrown under the bus as Donald Trump attempted to extort Ukraine back in 2018, 2019, withholding congressionally approved foreign aid unless Ukraine agreed to open an investigation onto President Biden or into President Biden, basically the first impeachment shenanigans. Rachel Vindman responded to the situation, the attempt on Trump's life, with this. She says, "No ears were harmed. Carry on with your Sunday afternoon," because Trump, of course, was not shot at. It's a reference to Trump being shot in the ear in the first assassination attempt. Now, you can say that that comment was callous and it was flippant. As a matter of fact, Rachel Vindman agreed because she ended up deleting the tweet and said, "I deleted the tweet because it was flippant and it was too cavalier and we shouldn't say these things about political violence." So whatever, you're entitled to that opinion. Don Jr. responded with, "These people are effing demented." Okay. All right. Listen, this is a son whose father's life was threatened. Totally understandable that he could be emotional about such things. He went on to berate 60 Minutes and CBS News because, according to Steve Cortez, wow, just hours after the second assassination attempt on Donald Trump, and CBS is using their 60 Minutes show to attack him as, quote, a threat to democracy over January 6th. No matter how you hate corporate media, it's not enough. Don Jr. responded with, "WTF is wrong with you people?" at 60 Minutes, at CBS News. Right? Again, totally understand, right? This is a son who loves his father. His father was just in a harrowing situation. The problem is, Don Jr. doesn't actually live by the principles he demands of others. So, as somebody pointed out on Twitter, Donald Trump Jr. Repeatedly made fun of Paul Pelosi, Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, who was in his 80s when he was attacked in an act of political terrorism by a politically motivated stranger who was looking for Speaker Pelosi. She wasn't home. He found her husband instead and attacked Paul Pelosi with a hammer. In response to this, Don Jr. made all sorts of comments about the attack on Paul Pelosi, and among them, he posted a picture of underwear and a hammer and said, "Got my Paul Pelosi Halloween costume ready," because Paul Pelosi was in his underwear when he opened the door and the stranger hit him with a hammer, making light of it. What's wrong with you people? This is Don Jr. getting hit with insta karma. I should point out that, as Nancy Pelosi says, as one whose family has been the victim of political violence, I know firsthand that political violence of any kind has no place in our society. I thank God that former President Trump is safe. As we learn more details about this horrifying incident, let us pray that all those in attendance at the former president's rally today are unharmed. So that was Nancy Pelosi's response to Donald Trump being attacked in the first assassination attempt. She issued this public statement praising God for his safety, the fact that he survived the attack. This was after Trump and Don Jr. mocked the attack on her husband, which nearly killed her husband and was actually something in which she was the target. You see what I'm saying? So here Don Jr. is ranting about the perceived lack of empathy for the attack on his father, but doesn't show that empathy in turn when the shoe is on the other foot. And that's why people on social media are throwing these quotes back in his face, those pictures, the hypocrisy. I should also point out, again, I mentioned, it wasn't just Don Jr. It was actually Trump himself. This is what Donald Trump said shortly after the attack on Paul Pelosi.
And we'll stand up to crazy Nancy Pelosi, who ruined San Francisco. How's her husband doing, by the way? Anybody know? And she's against building a wall at our border, even though she has a wall around her house, which obviously didn't do a very good job.
So that's Trump publicly mocking an attempted attack on Nancy Pelosi, which resulted in an attack on her husband, which nearly killed her husband. And he's mocking it to celebratory cheers from the cultists at his rally. You might be thinking, well, that's pretty despicable. That's gross. But you know what? That was more than a year ago. Except this is what Trump had to say 9 days before the second assassination attempt against him at Mar-a-Lago.
Force anarchy on the American people while they live in safety, in many cases behind walls. You know that. Nancy Pelosi has a big wall wrapped around her house. Of course, it didn't help too much with the problem she had, did it? But she had a big wall.
There you go. 9 days before the second attempt on Trump's life, he's again making fun of what happened to Paul Pelosi. Now, in response to the failed second assassination attempt on Donald Trump, this is how prominent Democratic leaders responded. President Biden said, "I've been briefed by my team regarding what federal law enforcement is investigating as a possible assassination attempt of former President Trump today. A suspect is in custody, and I commend the work of the Secret Service and their law enforcement partners for their vigilance and their efforts to keep the former president and those around him safe. I am relieved the former president is unharmed. There is an active investigation into this incident as law enforcement gathers more details about what happened. As I've said many times, there is no place for political violence or for any violence ever in this country, and I've directed my team to continue to ensure Secret Service has every resource, capability, and protective measure necessary to ensure the former president's continued safety." That's President Biden, Democrat. Of course, conservatives aren't happy about that. They think it's insufficient. This is what Vice President Harris had to say. "I'm deeply disturbed by the possible assassination attempt of former President Trump today. As we gather the facts, I will be clear, I condemn political violence. We all must do our part to ensure that this incident does not lead to more violence. I'm thankful that former President Trump is safe. I commend the U.S. Secret Service and law enforcement partners for their vigilance. As President Biden said, our administration will ensure the Secret Service has every resource, capability, and protective measure necessary to carry out its critical mission." Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate, said, "I was just briefed by acting director of the Secret Service. I applaud the Secret Service for their quick response to ensure former President Trump's safety. There is no place in this country for political violence of any kind. The perpetrator must be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Here's the Democratic leader of the House of Representatives. Political violence has no place in a democratic society. Pretty straightforward. And then this is what Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate Tim Walz had to say. "Gwen and I are glad that Donald Trump is safe. Violence has no place in our country. It's not who we are as a nation." The bottom line is this. Don Jr., like many other Republicans, are lecturing the rest of us, everybody, to be empathetic towards Donald Trump's situation and getting very upset when some choose not to be empathetic. My problem is this. You have to pick a standard. As far as I'm concerned, you have to pick a standard. If it's permissible to mock political violence, then it's permissible to mock political violence across the board, across ideology, across political aisles. If it's not permissible to mock political violence, and I understand why that would be the default, given it's kind of gruesome. If that's the standard, if you have no, if it's unreasonable to go into that sort of dark humor, that's fine. I totally understand that, but be consistent. It is absolutely absurd. It's preposterous. It's indefensible that Don Jr. can simultaneously repeatedly publicly delight in an attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband, a politically motivated attack, and consistently publicly delight in it and condemn and be very upset and demand that people who mock his father's situation not do so and show empathy or even criticize his father. 60 Minutes wasn't mocking what happened to Donald Trump. They were just going ahead with a documentary talking about how he is a threat to democracy, which he is. But do you see what I'm saying? They so rely on this asymmetrical expectation where they get to do or say whatever they want, whenever they want, and they are incapable of handling a fraction of a rounding error of it in turn. They demand the highest level of empathy, the highest level of grace, and give none of it in turn. And that's why so many people on social media are delighting in pointing out that Don Jr. is a hypocrite. I think it needs to be identified because, again, no matter what your standard is, It's okay to joke about these things. It's not okay to joke about these things, but it needs to be consistent. And if it's not consistent, then you're an unprincipled loser, and that should be called out, which Don Jr. is. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.